Oh, I see people are joining. Welcome to this GDC webinar on how to embed innovation into your organization's DNA. We'll wait a few more minutes for others to join, but we won't keep you early birds waiting. So we have a nice game for you. And to get you in the innovation mode for this webinar, I'm going to put you to a small test. If you have a pen and a paper, you can copy these 9 dots. If you don't have a paper, get your finger on your screen. Now use 4 straight lines to connect all 9 homes. I'll give you less than a minute for that. Any success so far? I think many of you might end up with something like this, missing just 1 out of those 9 homes. But no worries, you're in good company. Many people struggle to connect all 9. So you want to know how it's done? Well, here you go. See how the lines actually leave the grid? Well, that's what they call thinking outside the box. So many believe that this game from the 1970s perfectly demonstrates what innovation is about. Daring to think differently, challenging the rules that are given to you, and experiment until you get it right. Was this game too easy for you? See if you can do it with 3 instead of 4 lines. All right, let's pick up the program for this webinar. Now that we all have our innovator hat on, welcome to everyone else that joined while we were playing the game just now. We're happy that so many of you joined us today in this webinar in which we'd like to exchange on the role that innovation plays in the last mile distribution sector. We hope this webinar will inspire you with some practical tips that will help you embed innovation into your own organization's DNA. So my name is Gerwin, and at the GDC I'm leading our work on the innovation challenges, but more about that later. I'll be the moderator for this webinar alongside my colleague Ivona Cheng. Hi Yvonne, would you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, Harwin, thanks. My name is Ivona Cheng, and I work for Bobink, and together with Harwin at the GDC, we support the innovation challenges.
Great, and we're joined by 2 guest speakers today. You might have seen them on the video already. And they'll talk from their own experiences innovating with their teams. Both of them are GDC members, starting with Ashir Hassan, the founder of Naya Jeevan and Doctors in Pakistan. He has worked in the health sector in the UK and the USA, and when Ashir went back to Pakistan, he crafted an innovative business model that gives informal workers in low-income communities access to good quality healthcare. And to scale up these health services, Ashir was able to partner with various multinational companies, leveraging their existing distribution channels. Welcome, Ashir. And then we have Anton Espiro with us, who is the operations director at Solibrium Solar and the founder of Solibrium in Kenya. And although Solibrium experienced many COVID-related challenges that we all have seen, I know Anton as an optimistic leader and always full of ideas to tackle some of the hardest challenges. This includes their recent work on improving the lifetime of solar products and fighting the growing e-waste problem. Anton and Ashir, welcome again, and we look forward to our discussion later in this webinar.
Thank you.
Let's look at the agenda. So 1 hour is not an awful lot to talk about something as abstract as innovation. That's why we will focus on the basics. We hope this will inspire everyone here, both that feel new to the topic and those that consider themselves seasoned innovators. First, we need a common understanding and demystify what innovation is really about. Second, we will then look at what good principles are for fostering innovation, drawing from our interactions with various GDC members. And then we'll ask our panelists actually to help bring these principles to life. But we first want to hear from you, so everyone that has joined this webinar. And we'll launch a poll with 2 questions. In the first question, we'd like you to reflect on the statement about whether your team already has a shared understanding of the role that innovation plays in your organization. So let us know to what extent you agree to that question. And then when you're ready, you can scroll down to go to the second question and tell us in what areas you think the last mile distribution sector needs more innovation. And we've put a couple of options in the question, from improving products and services for low-income consumers up to innovative ways of how last mile distributors can finance their operations. So let us know which need to become hotspots for innovation in the coming time. If you have other ideas or suggestions, please leave them in the chat. You can do so throughout the whole webinar, and we'll pick them up later. Yvonne, can I ask you to tell the audience what we see as the votes are coming in?
Yes, indeed. As the votes are coming in, we have about 44% of the members agreeing that indeed innovation plays a critical role in their organizations. And one of the key sectors that requires more attention on innovation is on product and service optimization for the low-income consumers.
Great. To me, that sounds like a call to product manufacturers. It might actually be in the call today.
Yes.
So curious to learn more about that later in the webinar. And also good to see the other suggested areas, marketing and customer behavior change, as well as business finance.
That's true. So for customer financing, we have 21% who agree that this is indeed a challenge, followed closely by marketing and customer behavior change, and business financing, where 14% of the members agree that this is also a challenge. And there's 7% who have indicated there are other issues that they are currently facing with regards to innovations, especially in the last mile distribution.
Perfect. Thanks, Yvonne. Yeah, I see the results are published right now, in case you're interested. Then we move on, getting everyone on one page and define the what and why for innovation. So when you close your eyes and you think about innovation, what do you see? Maybe some of these things. As with many other sectors, innovation for last mile distribution suffers from a lot of hypes and myths. So sometimes it's actually easier to start defining what innovation is not. So some general misconceptions to debunk, in our opinion, are the following 4. First of all, innovation not being the result from just quick brainstorms, for example, during your annual team retreat, because this would suggest a eureka moment for innovative ideas. And on the contrary, innovative ideas develop over time and therefore need to be an integral part of your team's daily operations. The second myth to debunk is that innovation does not depend on people that are very creative or have a master's degree in design or innovation. It's for everyone that dares to think different and try out new ideas. I think Anton and Asher will show that later in our discussion. Then the third myth to debunk is that innovation doesn't have to be expensive. And actually not innovating at all can turn out to be very expensive for your organization. Because if organizations don't invest money in adaptations of their business model, they might lose their competitive advantage or simply lose out customers. So how much does innovation cost? Well, it's hard to answer because it's often not a separate activity unless you, of course, have an R&D team with their own budget. I think Naya, Jeevan, Asher has an R&D department, so we might learn a bit more about that. But when innovation is an integral part of your regular team, it's hard to add a number to it. But with the GDC Innovation Challenges, we've seen that GDC members use our prize money of 30 up to 50,000 British pounds to be able to pilot completely new ideas. but we're pretty sure that with smaller budget, you can also get very far. Then the next myth to debunk would be that while much of the public attention goes to emerging techs such as artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, an innovation doesn't always need to be technical, and they can be incremental as well. Using established innovations in new ways or geographies can be very effective, for example. So we propose the following definition of innovation for this webinar. So innovation being an integral part of any organization whose leaders invite their staff to explore new and creative ideas, which might help to realize the organization's purpose faster. Whatever that purpose might be, so either reaching larger numbers of consumers or becoming a very specialized service provider. So examples of innovation are trying out an unconventional partnership, piloting the use of new technology, or taking an idea from one sector and adapting it to your own sector or context. Let's talk about the benefits of innovation. So we've seen that innovation in the last mile distribution sector leads to many results, including these 4. As you innovate, of course, you keep adding value for your customers. Then secondly, you can turn market trends into new ideas that will strengthen your position. Third, investors may appreciate innovative organizations that have an inspiring story to tell. And of course, innovative mindsets build your capacity to quickly adapt to external threats, which will help you to survive or even thrive. And of course, COVID-19 has proven to be an extremely tough one for many last mile distributors. Because when we surveyed our members halfway 2020, more than 1/3 said that they'd experienced significant drops in sales figures due to the pandemic crisis. However, looking at the positive side, soon we started to see one innovation after the other coming from our GDC members, showing that in times of crisis, of course, business adaptations or complete pivots become a necessity instead of an option. To mention just a few examples, EcoFiltro was able to set up an online sales platform in just a few weeks, and they've seen a huge lift in sales figures for their water filters since then. And Nazava in Indonesia established a long-distance training program to keep their staff and resellers engaged. And while skeptical at first, their staff and resellers soon embraced Zoom or Skype-based trainings. We believe that many of these examples are likely to stay beyond the crisis. We share many more of these COVID-inspired innovations in our blog post on Next Billion. If you missed it, we'll share the link at the end of the webinar. So against this backdrop of COVID-19, the GDC's second innovation challenge that launched in July last year called upon innovators with ideas that increase the ability of the sector to respond to future shocks. We received more than 80 applications, and we were not only impressed by this quantity, but also by the quality of the ideas submitted. The proposed ideas cut across different areas of business operations, such as consumer finance, credit assessment for consumers, after-sales support, product diversification, sales agent management, and business finance. We also appreciated that many of the idea applications were digital solutions and submitted by partnerships between a last mile distributor, so a GDC member, and a software provider. For those that are not aware yet, let's look at the 5 winning ideas from this challenge, voted for by the GDC members themselves. These teams will be piloting their ideas from now until August 2021, this year, after which all their learnings will be shared with the wider GDC membership to support replication of the idea. Yvonne, can you tell the audience briefly what each project is about?
Yes, indeed. For the second innovation challenge, we had 4 winners or 5. But to start with them briefly, we have MUD and Vitalite Zambia, who are working on accessing customer credit worthiness on quickly and precisely manner through a data-driven, evidence-based underwriting module. Then we have Kambasco and Upia in Uganda, who are working on assessing credit worthiness quickly and precisely through a credit digitized assessment tool. Then we have Econom and Sevi, who are based in Kenya, who are embracing digital group sales through an app and a platform where the customers and the distributors would interact. Then we have Optimetrics and Upoa, who are working in Cameroon, yes, to manage remote teams via a new software platform. And the last one, which is MUD and Vitalite, who are also working together to work on managing remote teams. For more detailed information about this particular innovation pilot, get to the GDC website for more information. Back to you, Gawain.
Thanks, Yvonne. So let's pick up the agenda and look at good principles for fostering innovation. So when we were talking to these Innovation Challenge winners and many others, we learned a lot about how last mile distributors innovate. And based on these conversations, we've listed 7 principles for you to consider. And while I present these 7, see how many you can tick. So starting with the first principle, lead by inspiring example. So this is all about you as a leader of your organization. Do you dare to think big, test new ideas, and then create the space for your team members to do the same? Many organizational cultures are not focused on creativity, but error avoidance. And that's, of course, good for hospitals and airlines, but employees need to think about what's good for the business, not what process to follow. And creative solutions from your team will follow soon after that. The second principle is about incentivizing your staff to share their successes, but also their failures and doubts. So it's important to create safe spaces for them to question and push themselves, as well as each other. We think this way teams will find opportunities to innovate together. The third principle is about taking a human-centered design approach, collecting customer-level data and insights regularly. This ensures that you know what your customers' pain points are, engaging with your agents. And these insights could help you to spark new ideas. Importantly, of course, engaging your customer-facing staff in this process is important, as they often know best. Going to the fourth principle, allow employees to deviate from the script every now and then, if you want, because as they try out new ideas and embrace failure, that's all part of the organization's learning journey. Trial by error is an inevitable part of innovation, so do not be bothered about getting things right the first time. Instead, experiment with new ideas and iterate until you get it right. Going to the fifth principle, do you give time and space to your team members to be creative? Creative workplaces and online tools, particularly for remote workers, enable employees to become confident and collaborative problem solvers. The sixth principle is about not staying in your own bubble. It's important to meet with peers, even when they're competitors, and to take a genuine interest in the open exchange of ideas. You may want to take inspiration from other sectors as well, adapting proven solutions to your own context. And then the seventh principle is about exploring new partnerships. Even doing so when the short-term gain is not so obvious for you or the other party. You may find innovative ways to realize your common goals together, and if not, well, you still have learned something. We hope that you can relate to many of these principles, but what matters most, of course, is how you put these principles into practice. And now it's time to bring in our panel to listen to some concrete examples. We've actually prepared a couple of questions to structure this discussion. But let me first check if Anton and Asher, if you're still with us, we can hear you fine.
I'm very much with you, Heroin.
Sorry?
Yes, so am I. Yep.
Great.
Yeah, hopefully our voices are coming through clearly.
They are. Thanks a lot.
Brilliant.
Well, we can take off. And to help me moderate this discussion, Yvonne, will you join me and maybe fire the first question at Anton and Asher to reflect on?
Yes, indeed. So if I can start with Asher, if we can talk on the first question, especially with your work on experimenting and learning with your R&D department, how have you been able to embrace innovation principles and putting this into practice?
Sure, thanks, Yvonne and Heroin again. So we use a formula called the ABCs of innovation. A stands for agility. So being able to rapidly adapt to both environmental changes as well as internal changes. So we're always constantly scanning our environment. And when I say we, there are two teams which I'll describe. One team that focuses primarily on innovation and R&D, and one that focuses primarily on execution. But both of these teams are scanning the environment to see, what's changing in the environment, what's happening in the ecosystem from a stakeholder perspective. So stakeholder mapping and looking at how we need to pivot if we need to in response to, say, COVID or other environmental circumstances. B stands for boldness as well as vision. So boldness is having the courage to be able to say no, and also to challenge the status quo, to be able to reflect deeply, and to be able to have the not just the courage, but also the transparency, I would say, the openness to be able to go to donors and say, hey, we tried this, it didn't work. And having the trust with donors or with sponsors where we've already built that bridge between us and them, or we've built those, a collaborative bridge in which we have both permission as well as encouragement to share key learnings, key insights, etc. And C stands for culture as well as curiosity. So for us, what we refer to as a Kaizen culture, or a culture of continuous improvement, is really important to us. So we're constantly, internally and externally, again, asking ourselves, how can we do this better, cheaper, faster, better quality, et cetera, et cetera? Who do we need to partner with? How can we partner in different ways? On the curiosity side, we, as the word implies, we are insatiably curious. And so I think that one of the things that we, I would say pride ourselves, but we certainly feel fortunate, is that we have a team of people who I think are thinkers, design thinkers, and who may not necessarily come from medicine or from the marketing or corporate sector, but certainly their thinking, their mindset is that very cross-functional, very lateral thinkers. So I'd say that those are how we apply some of those principles internally. We have created a couple of teams that deliberately promote cross-pollination across both of our organizations. So we have these, what we refer to as agile or cross-functional teams that are built up or based on themes. So for example, digital transformation is one of the themes that we're currently looking at cross-functionally. And there's a team made up of different stakeholders from different functions across the company, or both companies in our case, which very intentionally look at opportunities to create value for beneficiaries as well as for other stakeholders.
Great. I will say you did well in bringing down the list from 7 to 3 with your ABC framework, Asher. Thanks for that.
If you like, I can make it A, B, C, D, E. D would be discovery, E might be empathy and experiment. So
well, we'll not finish the whole alphabet now, but I like that framework, and thanks for sharing, Asher.
Sure.
So,
Thanks for sharing, Asher. And just a question to the members, or a comment, is that if you have any questions for Asher as he continues to speak through innovation is in organization, please feel free to leave your comments in the chat and we will get back to them. And Anton, if you can respond to the first question as well, or give your input at this point.
Okay, thanks, Yvonne, and thanks, Gavin. So, unfortunately, we are not as well structured and organized as Ash's team are. So, I'm learning from that. And another thing I'd like to say from the beginning is that when we started Solibrium, innovation was more of a top-down approach. It was, coming from the management and telling people what to do. But as we have grown, I would say virtually all the innovation that we have is coming from our teams on the ground, who are finding interesting solutions to the problems that they're facing. We have to tackle distribution in the whole of Kenya. So there's a lot of challenges that our teams face. We are a small company, so we cannot solve many of these challenges by just throwing money at them. The other unique thing is that from our history, we've always had a very close relationship with the community. So our distribution network is built around community partners. So the people who are involved in distribution are not employees, they're community partners, people we create a relationship with. This opens a door for continuous feedback. We have a loop that goes between our partners in the community, our clients, and our teams on the ground. And this stimulates all kinds of new innovations that come in through the system. So what we have done right now is that we have tried to get as much feedback as we can from our partners and from our clients, and formalize the system in which we look at the feedback and the way we respond to it. And through this feedback, we've got some really new and creative solutions to ideas or to problems that if we looked at from the top down, we might have not solved in the same way. So most of our innovation comes from insights, from feedback from our partners and customers, and then from innovative solutions being developed by the teams who are actively engaged with the clients. These innovations are then suggested up through the system within the company. And then of course, what we look at is, can we afford it? Can we do it technically? Do we have the resources? And how would it work if we were to introduce it right across the whole company? So we end up having small bits of innovation that might function in one community and not another, or large innovative changes that work right through the whole system and work and end up changing how the company does business.
Anton, can I just ask you to give a concrete example of how that participatory approach in your team led to new solutions? And then if I may suggest an area, I saw like consumer finance coming up in the first poll, and I see that in the chat. Someone also hinted that we need more innovative consumer financing models, rental models instead of purchase models. So if you have an example of how you've worked with your customer-facing team to identify new ideas to tackle that problem, that'd be great. But I'm aware you might have other examples as well.
Yeah, so consumer financing is a constant issue. I mean, if you look at the survey we just had, that's also one of the things, innovative finance model for consumers is one of the things that comes up. The solar market is built, the solar home system market is built largely around a pay-as-you-go model. But this model is perfectly suited to the last mile distributor and the manufacturers, but it's not always ideal for the clients on the ground. So we recently had a situation where we entered a new market in a new community. And as my team was doing the sales, they were approached by a microfinance entity that had a creative way to address how its members can access the solar home systems that we are selling. And the main factor for us, of course, is that creative finance options are pretty high risk. But when you have a partner who has an innovative idea and has the background on how to address some of the risks, then we are willing to take that chance. So if we weren't open to the feedback that we get. And if we didn't have the relationships that we have with the communities, we wouldn't be able to have somebody come up to us and say, you know, there's an alternative way of doing this. This is what we suggest. Do you think this would help? To try and make this work, we often turn to our partners. For example, Upia, with whom we've been working with for some time, who develops a CRM platform for customer payments. We turn to them and say, okay, this is, you know, a suggestion that was given to us. We like the idea. Is it practical? Can it be built into your system? And if we can get digital help to solve that, then that's good. If we can't, then we try to solve it another way. But that suggestion from a microfinance entity allowed us to enter the market much faster than we would have without it. And of course, really helped us de-risk in that entry. So it was, you know, really good. I mean, I can give more details if needed, but main thing was that, you know, it came from the end user, it came from outside the organization, fed directly into the people on the ground who saw that it can work, and then they raised that through management. At our level, what Gavin said, management is busy trying to make sure people follow processes. But it's the staff who are innovating. It's the teams who are being disruptive, which is really nice to see. And that's a really one of the inspiring things about the team that we have.
Thank you, Anton. There's a question in the chat, but that looks that we will handle it on the third question. So if we can move over to the second question, and I would start with Anton again, and Asha, you can comment after that. So what do you and the sector, or we can say, what is needed to surface and scale more innovations in the sector? If we can start with Anton.
That's, I guess there's no solution that fits everybody, so I can't really comment what's needed the most, but we have found that partnerships across LMDs and across the whole sector is really important. And I remember Asha mentioned this, that he's got a team that looks at what's out there, looks at, you know, what other people are doing, and tries to get this into the DNA of his organization. I think that's really what's important at the last mile distribution space. Many last mile distributors are not very large. Very few have dedicated R&D teams, but all last mile distributors are constantly innovating at various scales, trying to solve the problems that they're facing. And many of these innovations are actually very interesting, but they're not that often shared. So I think one of the things that are needed to drive innovation in the last mile distribution sector is more partnerships, more exposure to each other, and forums such as the one we are having now, where different members of the last mile distribution are able to speak up and share and perhaps connect for further discussions down the road.
Great. Can I circle this one back to after? Thanks, Anton, because at the beginning I mentioned how you've been quite successful in setting up collaborations also with multinational companies. So what's the key to success for these kind of sometimes even unconventional collaboration, or you as a smaller entity approaching a multinational company to co-create a model that works for the both of you? What have you learned?
That was a leading question, Herwin. you just stole my thunder. No, I'm just kidding. So you're absolutely right. The idea is to so leverage is the key concept here, which is how can we leverage the assets of other companies, other organizations, other partners, governments, state entities, private sector entities, other public sector or development sector entities, and do so in a way which creates or unlocks hidden value. And so just to kind of give you one precise example, in a collaboration that we currently have, we have a situation where we actually proactively approached Unilever. Unilever is well known for distributing fast-moving consumer goods from factories across the emerging world to last mile villages. So their last mile distribution capacity has always existed. And so we always knew that if we want to get services or products to the last mile, we have a channel that already exists. The question was, how can we partner with that channel in a way which creates value for all stakeholders and aligns all interests? That was the challenge that we faced. And so we said, okay, where we can play a role in terms of as a social enterprise, as a catalyst that really understands the human needs or is empathetic to the needs of the customer and perhaps has a closer or more holistic view of the customer rather than just looking at the customer or the beneficiary through a narrow product lens, we could potentially create a lot of value, that some of which could be shared with Unilever, some of which could be extended to other partners. And so, for example, recently we have proactively integrated some pharmaceutical partners into that supply chain that already exists. So Unilever has a last mile distribution chain. We piggybacked onto it. We've integrated other pharmaceutical and nutrition partners. One of your GDC members actually was very gracious and actually has catalyzed one of those relationships with a pharmaceutical partner. So the role of GDC, I know that's the next question, but I'm just mentioning it here as well. I think the role of GDC is pivotal here to serve as that kind of that glue that holds these relationships together and these partnerships together, where we can play a real value creating role. And our value proposition, if you will, to large companies is, hey, we know your customers holistically. We've done design thinking. We've immersed ourselves in these communities for months. We understand their needs, and we are identifying partners who can cross-functionally or multi-sectorally address that ecosystem of needs. And so rather than functioning in silos, renewable energy or education or healthcare, et cetera, it makes much more sense to form a coalition that is customer-centered, community-centered, and partnering and leveraging off of the assets of companies such as Unilever and other such large multinationals. Again, catalyzed or kickstarted by development sector partnerships and funding, and obviously with GDC playing a crucial consultative role there.
Thanks so much, Ashir. I'd like to remind the audience that we can still take questions. So please leave them in the chat, and otherwise we'll just keep going. I'm sure Yvonne and we still have a lot of questions. So looking at the other stakeholders that we haven't talked about yet, including product manufacturers, software providers, do you have any suggestions for what role they can play? Because again, going back to the first poll we launched in this webinar, I think innovations that make products and services more relevant for low-income consumers and more affordable for low-income consumers came up as a hotspot for innovation. So I assume there's a role to play for manufacturers here, but maybe Anton, since you're selling solar durables, can you share your suggestions in terms of how last mile distributors can work with manufacturers, bringing together the best of both worlds, as Ashir just illustrated for the collaboration with multinational companies. But what role do you see for manufacturers?
Well, manufacturers have the biggest opportunity to be innovative in their products, and they have the biggest opportunity to support innovation on the ground. However, manufacturers often lack the direct link to the consumer. So you have a natural partnership emerging. We have found that the end user and the consumer often know best what they need and how they can access it. There is obviously interesting innovative approaches that come from the top down, but there's also very good solutions that come from the customers and from the end users themselves. So I would say that if you open up a bottom bottom to top pipeline of creativity and innovation, and you use last mile distributors to connect to manufacturers, to connect to the larger companies such as Unilever that Asha mentioned, then you really can create benefit for the manufacturers as well. The manufacturers are always looking for ways to stand out in the competition, to support good partners. So last mile distributors can show their value by showing their connection to the market. And I think this is an approach that we are working on with Bright Solar of Norway. And it's something that we hope to see pay off in the next few months, next couple of years, obviously. But you know, as an LMD, we are perfectly placed to understand our consumers, and our consumers are able to directly talk to us in ways that they're not able to talk to the manufacturer.
Great. Anton, do you mind sharing a little bit more about that? That's not confidential, but I'm aware that we talked about how you're full on e-waste now and looking at how to make solar products more durable for your consumers.
Well, I can talk about that briefly. Yeah. So we've been working on the solar home system market is pretty well known, so I won't go into many details. But if you consider the investment that an end user makes in buying a solar home system, you realize that it's a pretty high investment. Just, you know, a rough example, somebody's making $3 to $5 a day, and they're spending about 50 cents to 75 cents a day paying for their solar home system. That doesn't seem like a lot, you know, 50 cents a day, but when you look at it compared to the amount of money that the person has at their disposal, that's a pretty huge investment. I mean, imagine if in the West, you know, in England, you would have to pay 1/5 or 1/6 of your salary just for your electricity. I mean, that's unthinkable. People would not accept that. So we've always been looking for ways to increase the value, the return on investment to the end user, and extending the life of solar home systems is one of those ways. So that has been a key challenge for us. Of course, there's also the disadvantages of solar waste, solar e-waste. Lithium batteries are highly toxic. They're very difficult to recycle. There's a lot of plastic components. So reducing solar e-waste and extending the lifespan of solar products has been a key priority for us. One of the challenges we have faced in doing this is, how do you repair systems? How do you access systems that are already outside warranty? And we have found that consumers are very closely engaged with the informal sector in how they handle their solar products, who repairs the products after the warranty is complete, and how they dispose of the solar products. And many of our consumers pointed us to the direction of the informal sector when we asked, you know, what happens to your products when you're not using them anymore, when they break down? And most of them just said, oh, you know, we take it to the nearest informal guy, what we call fundis, Jokali fundis in Kenya. So taking this idea, we spoke to Bright Products of Norway and started discussing the possibility of making their units repairable by the informal sector. And then we spoke to Upia about the possibility of including the informal sector in the customer CRM platform. And all these ideas are coming together based on feedback from consumers and from the informal sector, as well as possibility of partnerships with manufacturers, in this case, Bright being open to the idea and being ready to take the risk of having an alternative business model in the market for their products.
Perfect. Thanks for these details, Anton. Let's pick up a question again from the audience. So I think someone would like us to reflect on where innovation really is. So innovation is often in new idea generation, but I believe this person is also hinting to innovation in the execution, right? So we don't really need another solar hub, solar retail kiosk, since many of these have been tested already. I think what we need is someone to sit through this whole journey and keep optimizing the model until you get it right, until it's viable. So maybe Usher, for you to reflect on knowing that you have an R&D department. So how do you make sure that they sit through that whole process? So not just popping out a lot of new ideas, but also actually executing them well and get the proof that you need in order to scale that that idea within your organization.
Yeah, thanks, Herwin. That's a really good question. So we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have these agile, what we refer to as cross-functional teams. These teams have multiple functions on them, and they're all focused on usually one theme. So for example, we have a customer experience, what we refer to as a customer delight team. Their mission, the mission of this customer delight team, is to delight the customer. And that interface and the definition of the customer is both internal facing as well as external facing. And so it also depends on how you define your customer and who your customer is. So we've kind of defined it broadly. But part of the team is so there is R&D representation on that team. So there are innovation and design thinkers who sit on that team and who provide their feedback. They're doing rapid prototyping. They're providing user feedback in real time. So that feedback is channeled into this cross-functional team. The cross-functional team is an execution team and so it has finance, it has business development, it has supply chain, general operations, et cetera, it's IT, et cetera, et cetera. And their mission is to scale these models, if you will, these interventions. And they are obviously focused on efficiency, process, systems. Digitization is part of enabling that. So digital transformation is definitely a part of this puzzle, if you will, especially in the COVID or post-COVID era now, I would say that digital transformation is key. So the way we've gone about this is, as I mentioned, is we have two sister companies. Now, you don't need two different companies, but I would definitely recommend at least two different business units that handle this. And so one of our companies focuses on scale and collaboration and supply chain or value chain integration. That's Naya Jeevan. That's the Naya Jeevan side of the business. And then Doctors, which is the telemedicine or digital health company, that's the R&D arm. So all of the innovation, R&D work happens in that entity. And then the two companies collaborate very proactively and very intentionally. And again, there are members from both companies that sit on that cross-functional team. So we've and there are cross-functional teams that are based on both accounts or projects, if you will, and there are cross-functional teams that are literally cross-thematic. So I gave you an example of customer delight being a cross-functional team where the delightful experience can be internal or external. So those are just some ways we've structured this. We also have a very, very strong culture of learning. So we run EMBA classes for our senior managers. The senior managers have this see one, do one, teach one philosophy. So they see the first time, they do it the second time, and then they teach it the third time. And so the see one, do one, teach one philosophy runs from the top all the way down and back up. And so I like to point that Anton made actually, which is that innovation is not just cascaded top down. It actually does surface bottom up as well. And in our case, that information flow is bidirectional. In fact, some of the best ideas come from our grassroots or our entry-level employees. And so great ideas can come from anywhere. And so having that openness to receiving those ideas and encouraging employees at all levels, especially in cultures which are hierarchical. We operate in a hierarchical culture where it's unusual for junior employees to share this type of information with their seniors. And so we've tried to challenge that, if you will, or change that status quo and really kind of inculcate this culture of learning, sharing, fast failures, fast learning, sharing insights, etc.
Thank you, Asha.
Sure.
And just to wrap up this panel discussion, it would be good to wrap up with a third question on which is your golden tip, taking us back to the 7 principles that Gawain had mentioned before the panel discussion. If Asha and Anthony could take a few minutes just to reflect on one golden tip, that would be good to close the panel discussion.
Anton, do you want to go first? Or?
Oh, you can go fast. I think you already have something at the tip of your tongue.
I'll just say I liked openness for unusual collaboration. I think that's a really good principle. It resonates with us. We're proactive and very intentional about it. We're also very experimental about it. We don't know how some of these partnerships will evolve, but we always approach them with this win-win mindset that we are going to share our knowledge, our insight, our resources, our ingenuity, whatever we can offer, we will offer. And we encourage our partners to do the same. And so when we approach it, we try and align expectations from the very get-go, that this is how we like to operate. This is how we like to create value. This is how we like to serve our end users, our beneficiaries. And ideally, if our partner is, even if their interests are separate, even if, let's say, it's a multinational, and of course they are motivated by a financial bottom line, that's okay, as long as there is some intersectionality or some overlap of interests. So of course, in this case, our rural or our multinational partners are interested in building the markets of the future, building sustainable markets, which enables sustainable development. And so in that sense, our interests align and converge, and that gives us a common space within which we can ideate, innovate, explore, etc. So again, openness to unusual collaborations for me.
Thanks, Asher.
Well, okay. Oh, sorry, Yvonne, go ahead.
Yes, Anton, over to you.
Yeah, I'm looking at the principles, and they're all so related. I think I agree with Asha that openness is really one of the most important, and closely related to that would be number 6, staying curious and learning from others. Like I said, there's innovation right all over the place, and as long as you remain open to innovation and you are not afraid of it being disruptive, there's always something that you can learn from other organizations. And in the last mile distributor space, I think it's important that we don't see each other as competitors always, but more as possible partners who are trying to solve the same problem for our customer base. So I would say staying curious and learning from others is really critical, and that helps in fostering innovation, even using the other principles, like acting on consumer data and creating and sharing reflection. Those are all things that you can learn from other organizations that are already doing it.
Thank you, Anton and Asher. And back to you, going for the remaining part of the session.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks, Asher. Anton, I'm glad you ended with that golden tip, because it's also actually what the GDC always hopes for, of course, that last mile distributors find each other and exchange learnings and find opportunities to partner. So yeah, let's wrap up. Even though I think we wanted to continue this discussion for much longer, but yeah, we'll wrap up for now. So yeah, we hope that from this webinar you took out 3 points. So the first thing being what innovation is and why it's so important for the sector, especially in times of the current crisis. Then what principles you can use to foster innovation in your teams, and then how to put these principles into action, which Anton and Asher, I think, perfectly illustrated. To help you not forget about these 7 innovation principles, we've actually created a poster that you can hang in your home office or office, wherever you are. So on this poster, you can also find more examples of GDC members that have put these principles into practice. We'll share the poster with you after the webinar. Before we leave, we got, I think, 1 more poll or 2 more polls. So we'd of course love to hear from you, like what else the GDC can do to support you to innovate, to support the sector to innovate. So in the poll, you should be able to see now we've listed again a couple of options. Doing more innovation challenges. We've done 2 so far. Would you like to see more? Creating a database of innovations and best practices to share with the membership. should your GDC play a role in facilitating that collaboration between manufacturers or multinational companies and service providers working together with last mile distributors? And a training component, obviously. If you have other suggestions, again, please leave them in the chat so we can pick them up later. I'll just wait.
Yeah, so they're actually streaming in, Garen, and from what I can see, we have 60% saying that they would like us to help manufacturers and service providers work together with last mile distributors to create new and better products and services. After that, we have creating a database of innovation and best practices. So in addition to the list you will share, I think there's a need to create more on that. And finally, on training and innovation leadership for last mile distributors.
Great, thanks, Jeevan. I think everyone should be able to see the results now. So clear winner being working more closely with manufacturers and service providers to optimize solutions for low-income last mile consumers. Thanks. We'll pick that up. That's great input. Yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar, and of course, a special thank you to our panelists, Anton and Asher. Thanks, both of you. I hope everyone will enjoy the rest of your day and happy innovating. So we'll share the slide deck and the recording with you soon after this webinar. And because we love polls so much, here's just one more, because we appreciate knowing whether you found this webinar useful.
Great. Thank you, Herwin and Ivana and Charlotte for organizing this. Thank you for the opportunity.
Perfect. Great having you.
And thank you as well. And thank you to all the participants and to the GDC team and to Asha as well. Very interesting to listen to your ideas. Thanks.
Thank you, Anton.
Right.